We know tax hikes. We know expiration of the Trump tax cuts, which is a tax break for every income level. People don't realize it, but yes, indeed, there was a tax break.
Tell us about that. You had that number on the middle class tax cut. What did they get?
So if you make between $15,000 and $50,000, you had about a 16% tax break. It was a range, but that was the low end of it. Between $50,000 and $100,000, you had a 17% tax break. That was the low end of it. So you will see more money out of your paycheck in a Kamala Harris presidency, on top of the corporate tax rate, the capital tax rate. All of that comes down, trickles down, but that is a direct tax increase you will have because of Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris's economic policies have sparked significant debate, particularly regarding the impact they would have on middle-class Americans. In the interview, Kayleigh McEnany presented a critical view of Harris's proposals, focusing on how her tax plans and economic strategies could lead to increased burdens on everyday citizens.
Yeah, this isn't just capital gains where you sell your home and if you don't buy a new one, you get taxed on that money that is in your pocket. To your point, it's unrealized. It is money that you do not have that you will be taxed on. This is a far, far, far left strategy. Totally agree with Donald Trump. He said last night twice, this is going to take us back to 1929 depression levels when you combine that with price controls. Yeah, and those cuts will come somewhere. And it's not going to be on, it may be the paycheck, it may be jobs. Those cuts are going to come somewhere in the company and it will directly hurt you. But, that's her plan. And it's crazy. She puts out this price control plan, widely derided, even by the Washington Post editorial board. Can't remember this last time, they came out hard against a leftist. And you compare that with what Trump's going to announce today. And you compare that with the prosperity of the Trump years, where every single group, Black, Latino, every group had made gains in wages, which were outpacing the 1.4% inflation rate we had.
McEnany's key argument is that while Kamala Harris claims her policies aim to uplift lower and middle-income families, in practice, they would lead to higher taxes, less job creation, and overall economic instability. McEnany began by explaining that under the Trump administration, middle-class Americans saw significant tax cuts, with individuals earning between $15,000 and $50,000 receiving a 16% tax break.
Yeah, add to the national debt more and more. And, on top of that, that's a great idea. Look, yes, I believe in starting small businesses and getting these tax breaks. But if you've lost individual income coming in via a loss of a Trump tax cut, what money do you have to invest to then get a tax rate? And that's before we get to the unrealized gains. It's not about transparency. This is about vibes. This is pure and simply a vibes campaign. They want the vibe as we're the new ticket, the compelling ticket. You want to be with us. We're out on TikTok. It's a vibe. It's a cultural movement they're trying to create. And in order to do that, you have to be short on policy details and provide no transparency. That's why the 17-minute interview, by the way, he got 3 questions, by the way. He barely spoke. It was incredibly awkward. The Harris campaign, what was so odd about that, came out and said he misspoke when he talked about facing weapons of war in war. He was very clear about that. The campaign says he misspoke, and then he decided to just change the explanation to "I have bad grammar." It makes no sense when you compile that one remark with all the other times he has inflated his military service, which there are, I would say, at least a dozen that I have found.
Similarly, those earning between $50,000 and $100,000 received a tax break of 17.7%. These tax cuts helped alleviate some of the financial pressures on working-class families, enabling them to keep more of their hard-earned money. In contrast, Kamala Harris's proposed policies would see a reversal of these tax cuts, with new tax hikes that would disproportionately affect the same middle-class families that were previously given relief.
For Harris, I think what happened in Wisconsin is this state was kind of trending a little bluer, but needless to say, this is a state where Trump was ahead, or rather the Democrat was ahead in Wisconsin by far more than where Trump is now. So it's still a margin of error race. The biggest mistake that Kamala Harris made was not picking Governor Shapiro. I mean, look, you look at the map and Politico Playbook laid out 17 paths for her, some number like that, 15 paths for her, and almost all of them except 2 or 3 required Pennsylvania. The biggest mistake she has made is letting her ego overtake what was a mathematically right decision and picking the popular governor of Pennsylvania who is out outperforming you with all demographics. Yeah, and the reporting is Tim Walz came in and said, I want to do this. I essentially want to serve you. I'm paraphrasing. But Shapiro
And I don't
came
want to
in,
be president.
And I don't want to be president. Exactly. And Shapiro came in and said, what's the job going to be like? What are my day-to-day responsibilities? Will I be the last person in the room with you? She didn't like that. She wants a subservient vice president, which is why she chose Tim Walz. What a horrible choice. Despite, I will say, in polling, he has high likability, which I just simply don't understand on a personal level. But the polling does reflect that, but it's not helping her win the swing state.
One of the central aspects of Harris's economic plan is the increase in the corporate tax rate. During the Trump administration, the corporate tax rate was reduced to 21%, a move that aimed to make the U.S. more competitive in the global economy. This lower tax rate encouraged corporations to invest more in their operations, hire more workers, and increase wages.
Yes, she doesn't take the opportunity, and that could be a big mistake looking back in hindsight. This New York Times Siena poll isn't the only wake-up call. This morning in Real Clear Politics average, it is tied in Pennsylvania. She's running 4.3% behind Joe Biden at the same time 4 years ago. She's running 6 points behind Hillary Clinton, same time 8 years ago. That's in Pennsylvania, where almost all of her paths run through. Her task tomorrow night, I would say this, the election is Trump's to lose. Tomorrow night is a must-win for Kamala Harris. She must separate herself from Joe Biden. NBC says she's going to provide some daylight. Cut your losses and run. Your job's not to preserve a legacy that doesn't exist. It's to differentiate yourself.
McEnany argued that this approach contributed to the prosperity seen during the Trump years, with wage growth outpacing inflation. Harris, however, has proposed raising the corporate tax rate back to 28%, which McEnany believes would have a detrimental effect on job creation and overall economic growth.
It's a huge mountain to climb. And so when I go on her policy website this morning, I see that she wants to lower costs. But wait, you were the administration that brought costs from 1.4% inflation to 9.1%. Then she says she wants to keep taxes low for the middle class. But wait, you want to abolish the Trump tax cuts, which gave a 15% tax break to anyone making less than $100,000. That's the middle class. To those making $50,000, it was a 16% tax break. So this isn't jiving. This isn't making sense. Do some interviews, give some answers. It will be incumbent upon you to do so in about over 24 hours.
McEnany emphasized that corporations are not faceless entities. They employ millions of Americans at all levels, from janitors to executives. By increasing the corporate tax rate, Harris's plan would reduce the amount of money corporations have available to invest in their employees and operations. This could lead to job cuts, wage stagnation, and less investment in innovation. Additionally, McEnany noted that the U.S. corporate tax rate under Harris's plan would be significantly higher than in other countries such as China, 21%, and Ireland, 18%, making the U.S. a less attractive place for businesses to operate.
So the first debate of 2020, it was a totally different style, not Trump style. What they did to prep him was sit in the diplomatic room. They had 4 individuals sit there and pepper him with questions. Did not work for him. Most people say the first presidential debate of 2020, he was too argumentative with Biden and so on and so forth. Second debate, we all learned. And we said we're going to have these informal policy sessions, very casually prep him about topics, remind him of certain things. But he really didn't even need that. Just let Trump be Trump. And it worked in the second debate of 2020. And they did this again, and it worked against Joe Biden. The one piece of advice I'd give for him, come up with your policy for women. And it exists. Marco Rubio, Marsha Blackburn, they have plans to secure our schools. They have plans to lower the cost of childcare. Read them over. I was looking at them this morning. They're about 50 pages. Be prepared, because that's what Kamala is going to prosecute you on.
Another controversial element of Harris's economic plan is the taxation of unrealized gains. This concept refers to taxing individuals or businesses on the estimated value of assets that they have not yet sold, such as stocks or real estate. McEnany explained that this policy could be particularly harmful to entrepreneurs and small business owners who may have valuable assets on paper but lack the liquid cash to pay taxes on those assets. For example, a small business owner might build a company worth millions of dollars, but if the business has not yet generated substantial profits, They could be forced to sell it just to pay the taxes on its estimated value. This, according to McEnany, is an extreme and far-left strategy that could stifle entrepreneurship and innovation.
A brand new clip from Kamala's first solo sit-down interview. She's attacking Trump on tariffs. Let's watch.
You don't just throw around the idea of just tariffs across the board, and that's part of the problem with Donald Trump. Frankly, I'm going to, and I say this in all sincerity.
Jesse Waters delivers a mock news report that blends political satire with humor, focusing on Donald Trump's rallies, Kamala Harris, and the 2024 U.S. elections. He starts by talking about Trump's rally in Pennsylvania and makes a dramatic remark that Trump almost got killed in Butler, injecting humor into the situation.
And from one soft interview to another, Joe Biden giving the ladies of The View one last good hair sniff. The leader of the free world making a special stop to the all-girl gabfest. The hosts were giddy beyond belief and putting North Korea to shame with how much praise they heaped on the big guy.
Vice.
You were my ride or die.
You've been the best.
He just wouldn't go. He was like a bug.
Waters continues by highlighting the excitement surrounding early voting, particularly in Virginia, and comments on the surprising Republican turnout, which he contrasts with the party's usual stance on early voting. The report then shifts to Trump's playful moments at his rallies, where he tries to get his grandson to say MAGA, but the child says, "Vote for Grandpa instead."
The ladies asking Joe about his replacement, forcing Biden to swallow his pride and act like everything's cool with Kamala.
What advice have you given the vice president about how to win?
Be herself. Look, she is smart as hell. As vice president, there wasn't a single thing that I did that she couldn't do. And so I was able to delegate her responsibility. She has the energy, she has the intelligence, she has the grit, she has the stamina, and she has the guts to do the right thing.
All right, you can either take Stephanie Rule's interview or the ladies of The View, Dana.
I'm just going to take this one real quick because I never thought that Joe Biden would make a political contribution to the Trump campaign, but he did so today. Because I don't think there's any way the Harris people thought that this was going to be a good idea. He says, as vice president, there wasn't a single thing that I did that she couldn't do, and I was able to delegate her responsibility on everything from foreign policy to domestic policy.
Everything.
Why wouldn't you just cut that soundbite and run it in all the battleground states and, you know?
Waters uses this as an example of Trump's relatable personality. Waters criticizes the Biden-Harris administration, focusing on job outsourcing and American companies like John Deere moving operations to Mexico. Trump's response is satirized, with Waters humorously noting that Trump would impose a 200% tariff to prevent outsourcing. This reflects Trump's economic policies of keeping jobs in America.
In the commercial break, that she kept all of his tariffs and then even raised them.
But I think some of them they did. The question is, a lot of them they did, and that was we talked about a lot of things in the break. A couple of things. If I wasn't surprised that the View praised him on his way. If we brought President Trump here in his farewell, I'd be nice to him as well, and would salute him too. So I think it's fine. I do think that Vice President Harris talking about the seriousness of the tariffs. I wish she would also add to that. Some of the very CEOs in the country who come on our business network here and say critical things about her plan, one should ask them, what do you think about tariffs?
Donald Trump holding a big rally in the swing state of Pennsylvania tonight, and he's just announced that in 2 weeks, he'll be going back to Butler, where he was almost killed. Voters across the country have just started casting their ballots. Early voting officially kicked off Friday in some states, and the lines were crazy. In Virginia, not a swing state.
Energy policy is another key point. Waters mocks Kamala Harris's stance on fracking, sarcastically saying, Kamala just doesn't give a frack, and uses it to portray her as unconcerned about energy jobs and working-class Americans. Waters also contrasts endorsements for Trump, like those from the police and Teamsters, with fictional endorsements for Harris from the drug cartels and foreign adversaries like Putin and China.
The Republican Party, not known for early voting, can't wait to get to the polls. As we head into the final stretch, the former president's in a good mood. Over the weekend, Trump held a rally in North Carolina and brought his secret weapons.
Make America great again. Vote for Grandpa.
Oh, he doesn't want to get off the stage. Oh, wow. Look at that. He's got the gene.
Working class jobs are being gutted because politicians like Biden and Harris let our manufacturing base leave the country for cheap labor in exchange for political donations. The agricultural machine conglomerate, John Deere, an iconic American brand, has laid off hundreds of workers in the Midwest and are moving their factories to Mexico. And Biden and Harris never even tried to convince them to stay.
As Waters continues, he criticizes Harris for avoiding the public and skipping the Al Smith dinner, a charitable event that involves roasting other candidates. He makes the point that Harris wants voters to know her, but won't engage in public events, implying she's hiding from tough questions about her policies.
This is vintage Trump. Cajole American companies with the threat of tariffs to remain in America, hire American, and make sure their products are made in the USA. This is why he won in 2016, and if this continues, why he win again. Putting the American people first. And American-made machines need to be run with American-made energy. Kamala Harris has always been against American energy. Kamala doesn't give a frack about you. She's lying about her record because she wants to be president. For her, this election isn't about you at all. It's about her. Members of the Teamsters, the police, and the Border Patrol are endorsing Donald Trump. Kamala's got the endorsement of the IRS union. And today, the spooks who signed the Hunter Biden laptop letter endorsed her. Oh, and the teachers union who abandoned our children during COVID, they're backing Harris. Also, the drug cartels have gotten behind Kamala Harris big time. Putin endorsed Kamala, the Chinese love her, and the Iranians hacked the Trump campaign and gave their emails to the Harris campaign. Remember the quote, "Tell me who your friends are, and I will tell you who you are." If you were watching football on Sunday, you saw a Trump ad telling you exactly who Kamala Harris is, in her own words.
The report becomes more absurd, with claims that Harris supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and wants to provide free breast implants for migrants. These extreme claims parody common criticisms of Democratic policies, blowing them out of proportion for comedic effect.
Trump's making his campaign about you, while Kamala's been hiding from you. After inheriting her old man's money and stealing his delegates, she hasn't done a single real interview because the people who control her won't let her. If she wanted to show America she has what it takes, she could hold a press conference tonight and say, "Hey, ask me whatever you want. I'll be here until the sun comes up. What do you got?" Kamala's handlers just announced she's skipping the Al Smith dinner, a tradition that goes back 40 years, where presidential candidates take turns roasting each other and just to raise funds for Catholic charities. Hillary never chickened out.
Jesse Waters brings his signature style to the forefront, dissecting the latest developments with biting humor and unapologetic commentary. His ability to blend satire with current events keeps viewers engaged.
She's always rambling on about growing up middle class. The campaign says they want Americans to get to know her. She says she wants to unite the country, but she won't show up and have a little laugh. She loves to laugh. She doesn't want to make fun of Trump. It's all she's good at. She doesn't want to have a glass of wine and raise money for charity. It's not like anyone's going to ask her questions like, "Why'd everything get so expensive when you and Joe came into power?" Or "Why'd you let 20 million migrants into the country?" There were no wars under Trump, and now there's one in Europe and the Mideast. How'd that happen? Nobody at the Al Smith dinner is going to ask her why she said she wanted to legalize prostitution and decriminalize crack. It's not like I'm going to send Johnny to the Al Smith dinner to ask Kamala Harris why she fell for the Jussie Smollett hoax, when everybody in common sense knew it was a setup.
Waters' take on political dynamics offers a reflection on the shifting landscape, reminding the audience that the road to the election is filled with unexpected twists and turns.
Kamala's flying migrants into the country. She doesn't want to deport any of them. She just wants to give them free sex changes. Now, if I was interviewing Kamala Harris, I'd ask her, don't you think free breast implants for migrants is going to make inflation a lot worse? The good news is people are starting to get to know Kamala Harris. You can't trust somebody who lies about their past or someone who ducks everything they're invited to.
The real insults come from Kamala herself, don't they? Because she insults our intelligence every time she sits down for even a friendly interview.
Laura Ingraham tackles the ultimate insult to the American people.
It could not have been a softer interview and presentation. The only missing question was, do you like long walks on the beach? She could reveal that as well. And as for the one-on-one with liberal billionaire Oprah Winfrey, if there was such a thing as a verbal foot rub, this would be it.
It seems to us that something happened to you the moment President Biden, stepped aside and withdrew his candidacy, that a veil or something dropped?
With Kamala Harris's failures on economic policies and border security becoming impossible to ignore.
Now, we have to remember, Harris has always benefited in her career from special treatment, including in this campaign. Now, she didn't have to go to win the Iowa caucuses or tramp through the snows of New Hampshire to convince voters there. And she doesn't have to do press conferences with hostile reporters, as Trump does. She hasn't had to explain her policy toward China or Russia. Her role is simply to repeat platitudes and memorize phrases.
We love our country. I love our country. I know we all do. That's why everybody's here right now. We love our country. We take pride in the privilege of being American.
Her press team has resorted to recycling tired, worn-out lines from 2016 and 2020.
I thought you said we were systemically racist. How do you take pride in that kind of country? And hope that the hundreds of millions of dollars that she's raised from millionaires and billionaires are going to be enough to drown out Trump's message of peace and prosperity. That's what they're hoping for. And if she wins, the establishment's going to make use of this template for all future campaigns, where the voters are kept in the dark, receive no assurances about anything, and they just simply dine out on celebrity endorsements and personality plays. This is a complete rejection of the democratic process from the phony defenders of democracy. And it's one big insult to all of us.
But as Laura points out, the real insults don't come from Donald Trump, whose jabs at political figures have become part of his brand, but from Kamala Harris herself.
But then came the surprise questions, and they were really kind of tough. Like, how are you going to reduce the high cost of living?
I'd love to know what your plan is to help lower the cost of living.
Yours is a story I hear around the country as I travel. And in terms of both rightly having the right to have aspirations and dreams and ambitions for your family, and working hard and finding that the American dream is, for this generation and so many recently, far more elusive than it's been. And we need to deal with that. And there are a number of ways.
Laura highlights how Kamala's media presence often feels more like a shallow attempt at charm than an opportunity to provide substantive answers. She mocks Harris's interviews as overly simplistic and superficial, noting how these moments often come off as scripted performances rather than genuine conversations.
Far more elusive, the American, what? I love how she acts like some external force caused inflation, by the way, not her and Joe's idiotic spending bills. Now, that's insulting, and it's also arrogant to believe that Americans should vote for you even as you are unwilling or maybe unable to explain your policies.
According to Laura, Kamala's reluctance to directly answer questions on key topics like inflation and border security reflects a broader issue. Instead of offering clear solutions, Harris often leans on vague and recycled talking points. This, Ingram argues, shows either a lack of understanding or a refusal to engage with the reality of the country's problems.
Her answers kind of remind me of that college kid who, when called on by the professor, hasn't done the class reading, so he or she just merely restates the question posed, as Kamala did on the question of how she's going to fix the border.
Laura also points out the hypocrisy in Harris's public persona, calling out the inconsistency between her statements and the actual effects of her policies.
At this point, Oprah's got to be thinking to herself, man, I just should have run for president myself. It would have been easier than live coaching this woman. Now, every exchange was an easy Kamala layup. And by the end of the interminable 68 minutes, Oprah had allowed Harris to kind of rebrand herself from an anti-Second Amendment fanatic to a modern-day Annie Oakley.
Whether it's on issues like public safety or economic hardship, Ingraham accuses Harris of offering empty reassurances that fail to address the struggles Americans face every day. Laura Ingraham sees Harris's entire approach as a calculated effort to avoid accountability.
I'm sure they would have thought it was just perfect for Trump to laugh if he said someone would get shot if it came into his own. They would have, they would have said, oh, it's heartless, you have no compassion. What if you shoot the wrong person? This is just more insults to our intelligence. And of course, it was all calculated, but it was poorly carried out rebranding. Kamala's just like you. But then you think to yourself, I don't speak like the words of one of those lame motivational posters hanging in your company break room.
By relying on friendly interviews and scripted performances, Harris tries to rebrand herself without ever addressing the core issues that matter most to voters.
The freedom to just be. I love how Oprah goes, Note her use of the phrase, how we came into being there. And again, the freedom to be. Freedom to be, unless you're one of the infants in the womb who's aborted in Kamala's dreamland. And speaking of that, today she uttered more insulting drivel about abortion in Atlanta. Her language was crafted specifically to mislead the public.
To Laura, this strategy isn't just dishonest. It's insulting to the American people, who deserve real answers and leadership, not hollow platitudes and superficial campaigns.
Most vulnerable among us? How about those who can't yet speak for themselves? How condescending, though. Condescending to women, who, by the way, are poorer than they were 4 years ago, are less safe than they were on the streets 4 years ago, and less confident in the future than they were 4 years ago. But Kamala's crack group of high-paid pollsters and consultants believe that women's first, second, and third most important concerns are abortion, more abortion.
Laura Ingraham doesn't hold back as she continues to dissect what she sees as Kamala Harris's superficial strategy.
We already know about the elites here at home who are doing everything in their power to defeat Trump. There's billionaire Alex Soros, who met with Tim Walz yesterday. He appeared to be in his favorite genuflect position. Then there's billionaire Mark Cuban, who it seems is incapable of measured thought about Trump's enduring popularity.
She focuses on how Harris's avoidance of tough questions and reliance on rehearsed responses are meant to distract from the vice president's lack of real achievements. According to Laura, this method not only undermines the role of leadership, but also signals a clear disregard for the concerns of everyday Americans. Ingram criticizes Harris's preference for controlled environments, where she's only faced with easy, pre-approved questions.
That are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on anti-Trump ads and lawsuits. Huge donor money also flows to smear groups staffed by Never Trump hatchet men. But Trump doesn't just have to beat all of them and their money. He's also up against the global elites who love having a weak U.S. president in place who puts foreign interests before America's. That's why they're.
So Kamala finally did a national solo TV interview. And unlike P. Diddy, she didn't need any baby oil to slide through this one. Before the interview, MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle revealed her unique qualifications for the job on Bill Maher's show.
Greg Gutfeld, known for his no-holds-barred commentary, recently pointed out what many Americans have been thinking.
Yeah, I play Would You Rather every time I put on MSNBC. Would I rather watch that or start a juice cleanse before making love to Andrea Mitchell? But voting for Kamala seems a lot more like a different game, like Sorry or Risk. Meanwhile, Biden was more of a boggle, Trivial Pursuit, with time left over for Operation.
Kamala Harris's newfound attention to the border crisis seems to be less about solving a problem and more about boosting her political image.
So that's all Ruhle needs to know. Kamala isn't Trump. And Steph's really passionate about Kamala avoiding the press, unless, of course, the press is her. There she is. But first things first. Why is Ruhle wearing the latest from the Wednesday Addams collection? Maybe she knew Kamala was going to speak less than Lurch. And where did they tape this? The back room of a Home Depot? I think they were both sitting on floor model toilets. Anyway, on to the substance of the interview. There wasn't any. There was more fluffing here than in your average porno.
Gutfeld didn't mince words in his takedown of Harris's abrupt shift in tone, framing it as yet another example of a politician following the polls instead of principles. It's hard to ignore the timing of her decision. After all, Harris has had ample opportunity to address the border situation over the last 4 years.
If Ruhle were any more of a plant, she'd require watering. But at least I didn't hear the word holistic 3 times in 15 seconds. And here I thought Joe was the stutterer. She says holistically like she just learned the word holistically. It was like I was in Spanish class when I finally learned the phrase el sexo anal. Kamala also talked as if she hasn't been the VP for the past 4 years. Instead, she sounded like a temp on her first day at a new job. She says she wants to create an opportunity economy. But like Joe, after a pint of strained peas and 3 Ensures, she left a big mess.
As vice president, she was even designated as the border czar, charged with handling immigration policy and ensuring the security of the nation's southern frontier. And yet, despite holding this title, Harris remained notably absent from the border crisis for years.
She's going to create an economy? She can't even create a sentence. Greedy grocers aren't the reason families need a cosigner to buy eggs, lady. You think someone who smoked as much weed as she claims would keep the price of snacks down? Of course, she wants those evil corporations to pay their fair share. Fair share doesn't mean anything. It's like saying I love you. For the phrase fair share is terminally subjective. And like a book from Brian Kilmeade, no smart person buys it. Especially any adult who's been around kids where saying, that's not fair, is applied to everything. Including when I wouldn't pay the Boy Scouts I hired to wax my back because the experience should be payment enough.
The issue grew, the situation worsened, and still there was no visit, no urgent speech, no grand policy initiative to tackle what many viewed as a growing emergency. So why now? Gutfeld argued that the answer is simple: politics. Polls have consistently shown that immigration and border security are among the top concerns for American voters.
Letting a Democrat decide what a fair tax rate is like letting a junkie decide how much meth he should get for $50. So that's all we got. But how did Ruhle think it went? Does she think one could watch and say Kamala didn't give a clear and direct answer? But that's okay, because we're not talking about clear and direct issues. Okay, flying nun. Her and Kamala should have a stupid off. The issues aren't clear or direct. Inflation, crime, the border, what's unclear there? I'm going to use that excuse the next time a cop asks me how fast I was going. Just kidding, I have a driver. Doozy's not bad. But Steph got exactly what she said she wanted, no straight answers. And for the rest of us, not so much. At least now we know why Kamala has been avoiding the press. I've never seen someone so anxious and irritable while trying to express hope and joy. She probably woke up with a headache. I don't know if she's a wine drunk, but her policies are those of a wine drunk. Vague platitudes that could only fool other drunks, matching her drink for drink. Until the morning when the harsh sun of reality peeks through the blinds. No wonder consumer confidence fell in September after notching a 6-month high. Because perhaps the public not only sees Harris as the Democrat nominee, but also the one being pushed by the legacy media, the deep state, Hollywood, all the usual suspects. Once again, we're in an unfair fight just because we're winning. You filthy people. I know what you're thinking. Happy Wednesday, everyone. So Joe Biden appeared on The View today, where co-host Sarah Haynes said it's like having one of the Beatles at the table. True, if you're talking about George or John.
As the 2024 elections draw closer, Harris, along with other Democrats, faces increasing pressure to show that they are doing something, anything, to address these concerns. Her sudden decision to visit the border isn't a response to a new crisis or a revelation about the severity of the situation. It's a reaction to political reality. If she doesn't act now, she risks losing the support of an electorate that is growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of action on the issue.
Kamala Harris will visit the southern border on Friday. She said she's looking forward to finally meeting Justin Trudeau. Speaking of Harris, at the last debate, she said she was a middle-class kid. However, it appears Harris enjoyed things most middle-class kids didn't, like living abroad, private school, growing up in some of the wealthiest places on earth. The only thing she didn't enjoy was a nanny, unlike her husband. You're welcome, America. New CDC data shows that U.S. obesity rates have fallen for the first time ever. But just like the crime statistics, the CDC left out the cities of New Orleans, Los Angeles, and The View. Reports claim that a U.S. woman died inside Switzerland's new suicide pod. Where can you buy one for a friend? Asked one woman. They say.
We're not messing around today.
A survey finds residents of Wyoming have the most positive outlook on life. Researchers could only find 3 residents with a negative attitude about the future. Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, and a snow-covered buffalo.
But Harris's pivot on immigration isn't just a matter of timing. It's also a matter of credibility, or lack thereof. Gutfeld was quick to remind his audience that this is the same Kamala Harris who for years downplayed the border crisis. She dismissed concerns about illegal immigration as overblown and brushed off the idea that there was anything particularly unusual happening at the border.
Finally, CNN aired a McDonald's segment featuring some of their food, but the food was not so much a prop as it was to keep Stelter from trying to eat Caitlin Collins. He's a hungry little devil. All right, let's do a monologue. So after 4 years as border czar and serving in our nation's second highest office, Kamala seems to have suddenly remembered that we actually have a border. She's seen the light, and it's not the one Joe's walking towards. True, after 4 years of denying there's a border crisis, what's changed? Why the 180? Do you suppose it's the polls? It's amazing how the only way to get a Democrat to do anything is their fear of losing power. Then suddenly everything they mocked becomes everything they embrace. According to a new Gallup poll, the orange meanie, he's winning, and the reasons why happen to be real, issues. Things like economic pessimism, inflation, fuel prices higher than Pelosi's eyebrows.
For years, she was content to let the issue fester, confident that it would remain a low priority for voters. Now, however, the winds have shifted. The border crisis is no longer an issue that can be ignored.
And there's that, little border thing, that crazy notion that every nation in history has been allowed to have a border except the U.S. It's no wonder a New York Times poll shows that in swing states like Arizona, Georgia, and even North Carolina, Trump is spanking Kamala like a mouthy orphan. And in light of how underpolled Republicans are, the margins are likely wider than a Jerry Nadler seatbelt extender. So Kamala, suddenly she's for fracking. Suddenly she hates defunding the police. And yes, suddenly she's heading to the border. Now, if you doubt that this is a major change from the past, here she is providing a nuanced articulation of her previous border policy.
And so Harris, ever the political chameleon, has shifted with it. Suddenly, the same politician who once scoffed at the idea of a border crisis is now taking it seriously, or at least pretending to.